Hey guys, this is Tauna. Today we're doing something slightly different. Let me know if you guys like it. But we're going to be talking about treasures and their impact on Magic the Gathering / Commander overall. Because as we've seen, in some of the recent sets, treasures have been kind of this more prevalent thing, which is good in some ways, and there are obviously some drawbacks and effects that it has had on Commander overall. So how did treasures come about to start with? So prior to treasure tokens, there were gold tokens. The issue with these was that they didn't need to be tapped to be sacrificed to get mana, which means that because of Improvise, each one was essentially 2 mana. Given that Aether Revolt was still in standard at the time, and that's what brought Improvise around, they needed some kind of solution for this. Thus, treasures needed to be tapped to be sacrificed. But this also, ended up being a good thing later on because it allowed them to make tapped treasures, which are good because you can't use them straight away. So you tap them to sacrifice them, but if they come in tapped, then you can't use them. So it's a way for them to kind of delay it a little bit. Now with Core Set 2020, treasures became a predefined token, and thus the description was moved from the reminder text into, into the reminder text instead of being in the rules text. Now, before we keep going, make sure you guys subscribe, make sure you guys, do all that kind of stuff to please the algorithm, and let me know again if you guys like this kind of video. So the origin and the rise of treasures. So treasures made their debut in the Ixalan block in 2017. And as I said, they are a predefined token. That means that they're a token that an effect can simply say, create a treasure token, and they're already defined within the rules, similar to clue, junk, food, and roll tokens. There are 278 cards since then that either refer to treasure tokens or create them or use them in some way. They are a deciduous mechanic. So that means that essentially they are in the toolbox of R&D to be able to use, and they're not something that you can expect to see every set. However, I think that there's kind of a little bit within almost every set, even the new Bloomburrow set has treasure tokens and stuff, whether it's in the actual Commander products or in the base set. That doesn't mean they're a big kind of mechanic throughout every set, but they are kind of sprinkled within nearly every set. And treasure is now the theme with the highest amount of decks on EDHREC because, the Commander creates treasures or the actual deck generates treasures somehow. There's a lot of different ways that treasures are important to a lot of different decks. All right, so treasures are artifact tokens. You tap and sacrifice them to gain 1 mana of any color, as you can see here by the actual token. They're created by creatures, instant sorceries, enchants, planeswalkers, and even 1 battle. It's also an artifact type, so technically there are 6 non-token cards that do similar things to that are, cards that you can have just within your deck, i.e. they tap and sacrifice for mana. So here's some examples of them, like the Gold Hound here. It's just a creature that comes in and then obviously it actually has summoning seconds, so you can't use it immediately anyway, but then you can sack it to add 1 mana. There's the Glittering Stockpile here, which slowly builds up and then you can sack it to add lots. So it's kind of like building up treasures that are tied to 1 card. There is Dire Mimic here and, the Buried Treasure. A lot of them, just treasures that you can have other things that they do as well that aren't tokens. All right, so the effect on Commander, and this is obviously partially my opinion, partially, opinions of other people that I've kind of talked to. Ramp and color fixing are more common now. Given that nearly every color has access to various different treasure generators, it's a way for them to be able to, work around you potentially not having the right mana immediately, or be able to ramp up by having generate treasures, and then that's essentially an additional land drop for 1 turn kind of thing. So you can have more mana available in the future, especially when, create treasures is stapled onto an already good card or a card that you may have used anyway. That's the kind of stronger kind of treasure based cards that's like, draw 2 cards and create some treasures. Then that just instantly becomes a lot better of a card. And Dockside is a huge staple. Dockside, I think, is probably the treasure card that has the most effect on most, anyone who's kind of working outside of a budget or not kind of working within, cheap cards kind of thing. Dockside is almost in I would say most kind of red decks, just because of the sheer amount of mana that it generates you. Like, you know, you play Dockside, you know, you've got 3 different people that all have different artifacts out, and it doesn't even count, you know, artifact tokens, so you can get, like, sorry, it does count them, so you can get a lot of stuff. It even counts enchants. You can just get a huge amount of value from one Dockside, and then once you get to the point that you're, like, blinking it or doing other stuff with it, it's just insane. Treasure is also very swingy depending on the deck. Sometimes in decks, Treasure is just insanely powerful. However, in other decks, it's just a minor bonus. So in those decks that it's insanely powerful, therefore, you know, you get some Treasure generators going and all of a sudden you're kind of going away with the game. It also allows you to save mana for later, which isn't something that we've had a huge amount of before Treasures, in my opinion, or for just longer, as opposed to it kind of emptying out at the end of your phase. If you have a card, you know, a land, you tap it and you generate a treasure, that's going to be more powerful than a land that you tap and then generate just a green mana, because now that treasure, you don't even need to use it immediately. So you can save up until, you know, the person ahead of you takes their turn in their end step, tap all your stuff, create your treasures, boom, you've got a whole bunch of stuff. So Dockside, as I said, is just crazy. In so many different red decks, it is going to be bonkers. It's one of those cards that in my play group, we've been like, I don't think we should really play this. Not because, you know, it's too expensive necessarily, just because it's so powerful. It's just when it enters, create X treasures, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. Again, this is not non-token artifacts, so if opponents have treasures, boom, that counts. It's also not, you know, non-token enchantments, so the rolls and stuff counted as well. Like, there's just so much value in one card that it's just become such a huge staple. All right, so some different themes that use more treasures than other stuff, because basically, you know, every theme can essentially use treasures, but there's some that are more likely to kind of use treasures. So stuff like pirates, outlaws, artifact matters deck, straight up treasure decks, right? There's actually straight up treasure decks that generate and work around treasures directly. Token decks as well, treasures are insane in those. Land destruction decks. Now, the reason I say land destruction deck is because if I go and wipe out everyone's lands, but I've been generating treasures over here, I have mana and you don't, nah. We've got sacrifice decks, anything that's like, you know, if you sacrifice a permanent, boom, that's going to be really great for a treasure deck. And dice rolling decks as well really use treasures very well, or generate treasures a lot. So some uses for treasures. First of all, there's lots of ways to generate treasures to punish opponents. While this is not a direct use, it is a use. So you can use treasures to punish people by making them, you know, do stuff so that way you don't generate treasures. So stuff like Smothering Tithe or Professional Facebreaker here, both, you know, do generate treasures based on your opponents not doing stuff. So this one here is if your opponents don't block, boom, you've got a treasure. Smothering Tithe, if they don't pay the 2, now you've got a treasure. We've also got treasures as a great way to be able to save mana for the future, as we talked about before, as that way you don't need to spend it immediately or to mana fix yourself. So stuff like Bootlegger's Stash here, which is tap your lands, create a treasure, you can save your mana for later. Or Brass's Bounty here, for each land, create a treasure. You could do that and then boom, just do a huge board wipe of lands, and now you've got a huge amount of treasures and your friends all hate you. We've got here, anything that is giving a treasure on ETB or cast is essentially refunding part of the cost, which is really nice. So stuff like Unexpected Windfall here. Discard a card, draw 2 cards, create 2 treasures. That is now 2 red for draw 2 cards. And same over here, discard a card, draw 2 cards, create 2 treasures. Essentially the same thing, except it's got, you know, different mana costs. Don Andreas, whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't control, create 2 tapped treasures. So you are getting a refund of 2 mana essentially for in the future. You can't use it in the at the moment because they do come in tapped, but you've got that option there to be able to get that refund later. This is essentially like, you know, your tax refund in the middle of a year. You've got the use of treasures here. Because you sacrifice your treasures, they can proc a lot of different creatures and such like that. So like Mayhem Devil, boom, you're dealing damage when you sack your treasures. Jury, getting stronger. Marionette Apprentice, making opponents lose life. You know, lots of stuff that is like ping for damage or make your creatures stronger based off of you sacrificing stuff. There's just a whole bunch of other uses for them here. So Vihan and Cyberdrive Awakener, are able to animate them to become creatures. Urza, you get buffed up on your construct based on the amount of treasures you've got because they're just artifacts that buff up. Or Jaheira, now all of your treasures have tap, add green. There's also the fact that treasures are tokens, so they're going to proc a lot of different things. So like, you know, Mirkwood Bats, whenever you generate a token, or Anointed Procession, now you're going to be creating twice as many tokens. So you're creating 2 treasures every time you generate a treasure. When you add that into the fact that, you know, some spells are refunding you by giving you treasures, you're getting a bigger refund, right? You're just ripping off the tax department. You've also got a few cards here that increase the amount of mana you get when you sack your treasures. So Goldspan here is whenever you sack a treasure, you're getting 2 mana of any one color. Same with Alchemist Talent. That's just, again, ripping off the tax man. There's also some cards that do extra if mana from treasures was spent on them or spent on another card while they're out. Again, Alchemist Talent is dealing damage based on that. Mastermind Plum is whenever you cast a spell, if mana was spent from it, draw a card and lose a life. You're drawing cards based on treasures spent. Reign of Riches, each spell has the first spell you cast each turn that mana from a treasure was spent to cast has Cascade. So now, you know, you're just generating more and more value from it. There's also the fact that they can be used as mana of any color. So they're great for theft decks if some of your theft cards aren't use mana from any color for them. So stuff like Fiend of Shadows here is whenever you deal combat damage to a player, they exile a card from your hand. You may play it for as long as it remains exiled. Now, typically, theft cards will be and mana of any color can be used on it, but there's some that aren't, like this one here. Edward Kenway is the same, doesn't allow you to use mana of any color. So this treasures allows you to be able to do that. Treasures can also literally be your win con. So stuff like Mechanized Production, if you've got 8 or more artifacts with the same name, therefore, you know, treasure token counts as that, you win the game. Or Revel in Riches, if you control 10 treasures at the beginning of your upkeep, win the game. Literally your win con. So some commanders that work really well with treasures. So we've got Vihan here, who's like one of the funnest kind of treasure commanders, because of the fact that he takes all your treasures, turns them all into construct, assassin, artifact creatures, and then you can attack, which is really interesting because you can then also, if you give them vigilance, then sack them for mana at instant speed, which is really cool. We've got Corvold here. Whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice a permanent. But the best part here is whenever you sacrifice a permanent, treasures a permanent, put a +1/+1 on him and draw a card. So therefore, you know, treasures sack, put a +1/+1 on Corvold, draw a card, add a mana. Or there's Magda here, which is whenever you a dwarf you control, it becomes tapped, create a treasure, and then you can sack 5 treasures to tutor up an artifact or dragon onto the battlefield. Now, my favorite is actually Kibo, who is not necessarily one of the ones that you would think of first when it comes to treasures, but there is a lot of really cool stuff with him that can work with treasures, and he's really cool. So he is tap, give a colorless artifact token banana to each person, which is essentially like a treasure mixed with a food. It is tap, sacrifice this artifact, add red or green, and you gain 2 life. So you're handing out a whole bunch of artifacts to people. But then when an artifact an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you're going to put a +1/+1 on each ape or monkey you control. And then also when you attack with Kibo, the defending player needs to sacrifice an artifact. So there is a lot of interesting cards that you can add into him that generate your opponent's treasures. So like Pain Distributor, whenever a player casts their first spell each turn, they create a treasure. And then whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, deal 1 damage to them. So some of them are like, you know, graveyard hate, treasure hatey kind of cards, because of the fact that they kind of work alongside the fact your opponent has treasures. And that's essentially how the Kibo deck works. You give your opponents treasures and then you punish them for using them, which is really fun and interesting to me, in my opinion. Now, there's also started to be a lot of different treasure hate cards anyway, given how prevalent they are. So like, you know, Shard of the Void Dragon, whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield or is put into exile from the battlefield, put 2+1/+1s onto it. Krenko, whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you can pay red, create a red goblin. You know, just a lot of stuff that's like, whenever people sacrifice stuff or whatever stuff enters the graveyard, or, you know, Bloodroot Apothecary is the most recent one, which I want to kind of talk about because that's what like kind of prompted me, in addition to my brother pointing out that I should make this video. This is whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-creature token, that player gets 2 poison counters. So that is just straight up treasure hate, but it also, you know, clue hate, food hate as well, I guess. There's just a lot of kind of treasure hate, like punishing people for sacrificing permanence cards that have been coming out, but there's also some that, you know, exist in the past as well, like Hailfire Tyrant. Whenever it deals combat to it damage to a player, gain controls of all artifacts that player controls. Or Viridian Revel, whenever an artifact is put into an opponent's graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. So that becomes whenever an opponent sacrifices a treasure, you get to draw a card. Because while the tokens are going into the graveyard, they get exiled immediately after, so they don't stay there, but they are entering the graveyard, so you do get stuff from it. So what do you guys think? How has treasure affected your EDH games? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you have a treasure-based deck? I hope you guys had a great day and goodbye.